welcome everyone. We already all said hi. I already told some of you, this is a West Vincent Environmental Advisory Council event, and we like to host many environmental events, educational and fun. I already told almost everyone about the Healthy Yard Recognition Program. We also have a pollinator pit stop program. We have a sample garden that needs some care in the park here of very easy to grow pollinator benefiting plants that love full sun. And every year we give away the seeds to one of those plants in January. This year we did in March because it didn't need cold stratification. And then we give away the plants in May. And May is coming up. So on May 10th, we're going to hold our first ever native plant swap. So if you have any extra native plants, you can bring them and swap them for others. And if you don't have native plants, we're also doing our pollinator pit stop plant giveaway. And our plant of the year this year is wild bergamot. So this is at Opalani Park. And you're welcome to come and get some plants and look around. So I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Paul Razzone, and did I say that right?
That's right.
Okay. And Paul and his wife Lori have been residents here in West Vincent for 8 years, and we greatly appreciate him sharing his expertise tonight. Paul graduated with a degree in environmental sciences from Gettysburg College and began working for a local environmental firm, quickly specializing in the septic and stormwater industries. He established his own firm, PR Environmental Designs, in 2004. He brings tonight over 25 years of expertise in system design, construction management, permitting, and soil testing. And as a consultant who provides design and installation of stormwater management systems, Paul enjoys the planting, installation, and maintenance of rain gardens. So, over to you.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you for having me here. Can we get, is the projector, do I need to hit something to get the pictures on?
Oh, yes. Sorry.
That's all right.
I wonder if we should turn those lights off.
Probably.
Is it better for
I was working outside all day, so this was what we were supposed to be doing when you got here.
Is that better?
That's better.
So do you know why? Do I have to hit this twice? Oh, there it is.
On,
There it is.
But there's a brightness thing here. There's a brightness.
They do better. It's like
It's getting better on its own. All right, just need to heat up probably.
Maybe I'll stand back here in case I need to point some things out.
Good.
All right, well, thanks again for having me. My name's Paul Razzone. I am an environmental consultant. My company, as Donna mentioned, specializes in the design and installation of septic systems and stormwater management systems. And of course, one type of stormwater management system is the rain garden, which we're here to talk about tonight. I figured I'd give a little background just on the concept and ideas behind stormwater management before we dig more into the rain gardens. The first question being, why do we need stormwater management? And as we've built properties, houses, roads, buildings, anything with impervious coverage, the more we build, it decreases the ground's natural ability to absorb runoff. And in heavy rain events, the more impervious that is existing or being built, the more that is going to contribute to flooding, erosion and sedimentation. So stormwater management is a way to offset, the impacts that we've had on our environment in terms of the ground not being able to absorb as much as it naturally could if it was just all natural ground. So, you know, some of the benefits that we get from managing stormwater is we're able to protect streams because erosion and sedimentation causes degradation of streams. We're able to preserve our agricultural areas, preserve our roadways and our properties and homes. And we think about stormwater management where we live here in the suburbs. There's a very important component of it in urban areas, Philadelphia especially being one of them, where all the piping infrastructure, stormwater sewers and sanitary sewers, kind of antiquated and commingled. So in times of heavy storms, sanitary sewers are overrun by stormwater, and then treatment plants can't keep up with the demand and end up bypassing a lot of raw sewage into the streams. We do a lot of work in Philadelphia. There's a major incentive program going on where any commercial or industrial properties are given subsidies so they can install stormwater systems. And a lot of them are underground basins, but we do actually do some rain gardens within the city of Philadelphia. And it really helps to minimize the amount of infiltration that's going into the sanitary sewers. So when is stormwater management required? It's set forth in regulations by the state of Pennsylvania, and it's administered through local municipalities that have adopted ordinances for how to manage stormwater. And it's often required whenever there's any type of new building or construction, anything where you're adding impervious. So for homeowners, you know, obviously building a new house, expanding a driveway, installing a pool, patio, or deck, that's creating new impervious surfaces that now have to be accommodated for through new stormwater facilities. Every township has their own threshold as to how many square feet of impervious you can install. Before you have to do stormwater management, the average is around 1,000 square feet. It does vary from township to township. Some allow for, like, say, 500 square feet. You can do a more simplified approach. Anytime you're over 1,000, 1,500 square feet, you have to do a much more detailed engineering approach that includes doing a grading plan and designing a stormwater management system that can handle any new impervious surfaces. Some townships, West Vincent isn't one of them, actually, if you're replacing impervious surface, don't give you credit for that and make you accommodate for that. So in some townships, Radnor being one off the top of my head that we deal with a lot, you can be replacing the same thing that was there before, same amount of square footage, but they're considering it new construction and therefore requiring stormwater management to take place. And basically, with stormwater management, you need to somehow collect and convey that new surface runoff that's being caused by the new impervious surfaces to some type of system that can temporarily store the water to offset that being contributing to flooding and new erosion, and then store that water for a period of time and then release it in some type of controlled manner. So there's different types of stormwater management. Figure I go through a couple of those. For those of you in the know, they're referred to as BMPs, which is DEP's kind of all-encompassing acronym for best management practices. It applies to types of stormwater systems and design and engineering approaches, basically to form a solution. The first one is infiltration beds, and they're more like a traditional stone pipe type of system, kind of like a very large septic system, where water is collected and put into ground under with large beds that have stone aggregate and pipe. And these allow for a lot of volume storage during heavy surges, and are best used in areas with deep well-drained soils. So typically you want like at least 6 feet of suitable soil so it actually can drain out the bottom instead of just storing it. I'll get a little bit more into the type of soil testing and geology studies that need to happen so you can properly design both infiltration systems and rain gardens. So these basically collect water. This was a project in Radnor where they were replacing a pool at an apartment building. And because it's Radnor and because they were replacing the existing pool, they still had to accommodate for all the stormwater runoff that was going to be created by the pool and decking. And a rain garden wasn't a good option for this site because we had a limited area to work with between the building and the pool. Wouldn't be practical to have a rain garden there. They needed it for like lawn and pool decking areas. So this is the system that went in. There's pros and cons to both, you know, typical infiltration beds like this and rain gardens. They can be hidden underground. You're not going to see many components at the surface when everything's done and backfilled. It's typically just lawn. But they can also be put in areas that will eventually be you know, paved parking areas, driveways, patios, so they can be hidden in areas where rain gardens cannot. Usually stone and pipe. Sometimes we use these things called leaching chambers, which offer a lot more storage volume, so you get a lot more runoff capacity in a smaller area. This is an example of where a system went in for an area to be paved afterwards. So, you know, they can be kind of used on sites where space is limited and you can't have like a garden area above it. They do need deep well-drained soils because if you put a system like this in an area with a high water table, it's just going to collect more water than it can actually absorb and drain, excuse me, drain away. One of the pros of these systems, besides being able to put in areas that things like driveways, parking areas can go over, there is a little less maintenance with them. Typically there'll be stormwater inlets or catch basins where the water's collected from, you know, piped from downspouts or collected from the surface from a driveway or even like a lawn area. And those all will have sump drains in them like this. So that's typically all the maintenance you're going to have with an infiltration system like that. Is occasionally cleaning out the sediment that they filter out of the runoff before it gets into the stormwater bed. Now the cons of these types of systems. It's called a rain tank system. You can see it's got much more storage capacity than a bed that's filled with stone aggregate. Allows you to control more water in a smaller area. One cool thing about these types of systems is that because there's no stone aggregate and they basically act as big underground tanks or cisterns, is they can be used for rainwater harvesting, where you've got some kind of filtration and pump system. So you're containing this water to reuse it, and any excess that's flowing in during a storm event is draining into the ground. But they're not that aesthetically pleasing use, as you can see. They're stone and pipe and very industrial looking, and you know, they don't make something beautiful and aesthetically pleasing like a rain garden can. And like what I just showed you with the catch basin, that can trap sediment, but rain gardens also have the ability to do biofiltration, where through uptake of nutrients in the root systems, you can eliminate or decrease the amount of pollution that goes into a rain garden type of system through nutrient uptake of things like fertilizer runoff, runoff from farms with farm animals that have a lot of manure that is going to end up in the streams. A rain garden has the ability to not only absorb all the water, but also take up some of those excess nutrients that would otherwise end up in the streams. And, you know, when properly done, it's a good tool for promoting the planting of native plants and wildflowers, small trees and shrubs that, you know, you do not get when you're doing an underground infiltration bed. And a lot of times it's an aesthetic decision. A lot of times it's also based on the type of soils that we have. Here in West Vincent, we have like a pretty good range of soils. We have some lower lying areas that have high water tables, perched water tables. Areas like that, a rain garden is going to be much better suited because you cannot get any infiltration into the ground. If you go so deep, you're into either rock or groundwater, and the water that you're trying to capture and manage is just not going to go anywhere. Another example of a nice looking rain garden in the backyard. This is an interesting one. Another use for rain gardens is to deal with discharge from sump pumps and water treatment systems. Around here again, high water table, a lot of people have sump pumps. Hard water, a lot of people have water treatment systems. This was one that was designed specifically to take a sump pump discharge and a discharge from a water softener, which has a high salt content. So previously the homeowner had a constant wet spot in the yard where the grass was always dying because of all the excess salt. So this is a way to manage it and store it and put in plants that not only can tolerate a lot of water, but can also tolerate a lot of salt. And that's a great practical use for a certain type of rain garden. So when we design any of these systems, it's really important to know what the soils you're dealing with are. And this is what I do almost on a daily basis, is evaluating soils and doing infiltration testing to determine how well the soil can absorb water at different depths. Kind of fascinating if you're into dirt, kind of also like watching paint dry. What we want to do is evaluate the depth of the soil to see how deep it is to any type of restricted layer of rock or groundwater. If we've got deep, well-drained soils, then it's possible to consider an infiltration bed, first types of systems that I showed you. If it's not, and you're restricted to doing something shallower, a rain garden is going to be sometimes your only option for managing stormwater. Yet you still want to know what the depth is to the water table, and you still want to know how well the soil drains at the depth that the bottom of the rain garden is going to be, whether it's a depression into the ground or built on the surface and bermed around to contain water. Because that infiltration rate kind of plugged in with the amount of stormwater you're trying to capture from the new impervious coverage or any impervious coverage that's creating a runoff problem, will determine the size and square footage and area of the system. The slower the drainage, obviously, we'll want a bigger square footage surface area for the water to spread out and be able to seep into the ground. It's really important that rain gardens are designed to fully drain within 24 to 48 hours. So that, the size is determined by the drainage rate, the amount of water coming in. So you can have something that's drained, because beyond 24, 48 hours, we're not trying to create swamps, and we're not trying to create like breeding grounds for mosquitoes. So, a rain garden is basically like a vegetated basin that captures the runoff and stores the water so it can be released either into the ground through drainage, through some kind of overflow structure in a controlled way that's going to be discharged that will prevent erosion. And also a lot of the water is taken up by the plants in the rain garden and either used for vegetative growth, or some of it's actually lost through evapotranspiration. Water gets taken up from the plants and released into the atmosphere. So this is a cross section that shows kind of, the components of a rain garden. You've got the bottom depth. There's usually some type of berm all around it, or at least on the downslope side, so you can contain the water. The soil underneath that, you've already determined what its drainage capacity is. And then we come in and we usually put in 12 to 24 inches of an engineered soil that's like a mix usually of topsoil, compost, and sand. So it's going to provide a good medium that plants can grow and thrive in, and it's also going to provide a medium that will be able to drain. And there's various ways we can get water to rain gardens. In this example, you're basically a stone-lined swell that's taking water running off from a parking area, and various ways to allow the basin to drain itself once it's reached its designated capacity, either through an overflow pipe or through some kind of engineered outlet weir that's at a determined height, that so you can only get so much water into them, so you're not inundating them beyond their capacity. This is another diagram that shows just various ways that you can get the water that you're trying to control. Again, this is kind of like a stone-lined swale. This is a direct pipe from a rain gutter, which is one of the most common ways to get water into a stormwater management system or rain garden area. You kind of get creative with it. They can just be placed below, say, a driveway or patio, as long as you've got a gravity flow to it. This is an example where it's designed next to a parking area, so water can run off directly into the rain garden from the parking area. Pipes are required. This is a very common yard drain type of drain that if you've got a wet spot in the yard, you can put that in to collect the water and convey it right to your rain garden. If you want to be the ultimate conservationist, you can put in a rain barrel, so you've got some stored water for all your other gardening needs, with the overflow pipe directed towards a rain garden. This is a rain garden we installed in the fall. It doesn't look like much. The property's still under construction. We just planted it basically with a native seed mix just to try to get it stabilized before fall. And once the project's further along in construction, we'll get some planting. But it's basically a backyard of a house area, and we've got a berm here. We've got an outlet structure here, so once this fills up with a determined amount of water, it'll overflow to an end wall. It's always important to make sure you've got some type of stone spillway to prevent erosion from the end wall when it's going to allow a lot of water out during a heavy storm. And this is the construction of a rain garden we did a few years ago at a place called Thorncroft. It's a equestrian center in Malvern that does various forms of equestrian therapy. They built a small outbuilding for a caretaker for the property. It's a pretty small house, but it ended up being a pretty large rain garden because it's an area with a high water table. So to be able to handle just the water from the driveway and relatively small house, we ended up with a rain garden that was about 120 feet long and about 15 to 18 feet wide, just to offset the amount of water from maybe a 2,000 square foot ranch house in the driveway. So here it's been excavated. We've taken the excess soil and built a berm, tried to stabilize that with erosion control blanket. It's very, very critical that you get the bottom level and you have the predetermined elevation for the bottom, as well as the heights of the berm, because that's what's going to contain the water. And there's also an outlet structure. You'll see that when it fills up with the amount of water that it's supposed to handle, it'll take the rest out through the outlet structure. So this, we're just spreading the compost, topsoil, and sand mix that will be a planting medium. This is it fully constructed. You can see the outlet structure in the middle. Still spreading the topsoil. Almost getting there. There's the outlet structure. The outlet controls over here by the excavator. When it gets to its design volume, it will overflow and come out downhill. This is the fun part. This is the planting part, where I bring in the lovely and skilled planting crew that consists of my wife, my mother-in-law Nancy, my sister-in-law, and Nancy's friend. Very enthusiastic helpers. So this being about a little over 2,000 square foot, it was a lot of plants. And
That's not a plan.
There's the rest of the crew doing serious work, and Lori's holding a stick for some reason. It's important to, we cover the fabric, we cover the outlet with fabric, so during construction, until things have gotten stabilized, you're not sending any of that loose soil out of the outlet. You know, in this, I believe the engineer designed a somewhat specific planting pattern on this. So we kind of sectioned off areas to you know, put our different sections of plantings. And this was also done in like a very dry period of summer, which is really challenging when you're building a rain garden and putting in plants that, you know, that need water to thrive. So there's a lot of trips out here doing watering, even just to get the grass to grow on the berms so that was stabilized, and then to get the plants to become established. It's getting there. It's always good to take a little break when you're planting 300 or so plants. And that's finally about there. There's Lori helping me out doing the aforementioned watering. That it took a lot of it. You know, it happened to be very dry, and you know, rain gardens do not establish well in dry weather. So I'm trying to remember what we planted there. That's coming along. And this is when it's, you know, finally starting to establish. Got some blue lobelia there, and that's some cardinal flower. You know, rain gardens, you can plant a pretty wide variety of obviously it needs to be a plant that can tolerate and even likes to be saturated for an extended period of time. There's, you know, and we always encourage the use of native plants. There's so many to choose from. You can do flowers, you can do perennials, you can do shrubs, you can do grasses, small shrubs, and even small trees work well in rain gardens. You want to be cognizant of, is it an area that gets full sun? Is it an area that's shade, part shade? You know, so that'll get factored into determining what's going to plant well in your rain garden. And then there's different zones that you need to plant for. Like this would be the saturated zone that stays wet for a day or two and can have 3 or 4 inches of water in it. And then as you get up the side, you get a zone, the side slope zone, that's you want to pick plants that can take water but don't want to be totally saturated. There's a lot of good resources out there. This kind of shows the different zones and what kind of plants you want to choose for the area that's saturated, the ponding area, side slope area, which is going to get wet but not stay saturated, and then, you know, to keep it looking nice and to keep erosion from happening on the top berms, you want some plantings up there as well, but they're not going to be you know, plants that need to tolerate a lot of water. One of the resources we use is this Penn State Extension website. They're a great resource for listing native plants and the different zones within a rain garden that you'd want to plant. And Ernst Seeds, of course, is a great company that puts together seed mixes, native seed mixes for different areas of the country, and make specific rain garden seed mixes that we use a lot. But they're great. You can call them up, tell them what you're dealing with, what kind of look you're going for, and you know, they can put together custom seed mixes for you. This is one we use a lot. It's a native planting mix that is suitable for rain gardens around here. So, you know, and I guess the last thing I'll touch on is what type of maintenance. There's a little bit more maintenance involved with rain gardens because, you know, with infiltration beds, you're basically just cleaning out sediment that gets caught in catch basins. With a rain garden, you're going to have maintenance similar to any other type of garden. You have, you know, pruning, thinning plants out, weeding, changing mulch. Sometimes mulch is put at the top layer in a rain garden. And you're going to have, you know, those duties you'd have in any other garden. So they're a great way to capture and manage stormwater and They offer more filtration in terms of filtering out pollutants, but it does represent a little bit of a maintenance job that you're going to have to continually maintain like you would any other garden. But in the end, you'll end up with something that's serving its purpose and also adding something that's aesthetically pleasing to your yard, that's going to attract pollinators, birds, butterflies, and contribute to some biodiversity in the area as opposed to a pit of stone and pipe on the ground. So I think that's probably all I have. I'll take any questions if I can answer any questions. Anyone has any specific questions?
Good question. So if you have an infiltration system that's already in, can you put a rain garden in with that or not?
Well, in your case, you could put some planting in above it, but it's probably not, you're going to want to choose plants that are not going to need frequent saturation.
Right.
So you can plant above it, you can plant anything on top of them in terms of native grasses or wildflowers. But in an instance like that, where you have an infiltration bed underground, that water was designed to drain out of the bottom and drain pretty quickly.
Right.
So there's a lot of planting choices you could do in terms of doing native meadow or native wildflowers, but you want to choose a mix that is not going to need constant saturation because it's just not designed to hold water to the surface.
If you have like the clay, if you have clay soil, do you ever dig out 6 feet of clay and put in, or is that underneath?
Well, it really depends what's underneath that, and that's why we do like the soil test pits to evaluate soil profiles, because sometimes you will have a restrictive layer of clay, and sometimes underneath that you'll find a sandier type of soil that will drain, or sometimes beneath that you'll find water table. So it really depends what the soil profile is. For the infiltration beds, a lot of times we end up digging out like a B horizon, we call it, that's more of an impermeable clay layer, and get to something that's more suitable for drainage, like a sandier type of soil. But if under that clay got a fragipan, which is basically compacted clay layers that stay saturated, digging it out is going to, it's a good candidate for a rain garden system. If there's nothing below that layer, that will drain well.
Right.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
The first relates to planting larger trees that like wet feet, as they say. Like I've heard if you have a moist section in your yard, planting a sycamore or a willow or a river birch can help remediate that. Would you agree with that?
It can help if you're talking about an area that's going to remain flat and it's not going to be inundated with water.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So it never gets like really flooded.
Right.
But during heavy rain, it definitely gets
Yeah.
spongy or moist.
Trees like willows like that, like wet soils. I don't think they like to be saturated on the trunks. Gentleman sitting next to you might be able to answer that better. He's a gardener. No, right here.
Okay.
You're right.
I never asked mine.
That will help, and then you want to make choices like that if you want to plant trees in an area that's wet, and trees like sycamores and willows will take up a lot of the water in the soil. I don't know if you want to put something that large within a rain garden, that kind of would overtake
Right, that's
it.
not as much a rain garden,
Sure.
that's planting a big tree.
Yeah.
So I have a section of my yard that is at a flat section from like a long hill or slope, and it does occasionally get moist. And my problem is it's gotten populated by, invasive ground covers that I just want to get rid of and replace with something that's more beneficial and aesthetic. So I've planted a bunch of elderberries, but now that we're like getting to lawn mowing season, my husband who mows is annoyed that he's like weaving in and out of all of these bushes.
Right.
So I'd like to take this section and just convert the whole thing to some kind of planting. And I don't know if it's exactly a rain garden, like it gets moist, but it,
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a
there's
good
never
area.
like standing water per se.
Right.
So what is like a pretty ground cover that you would recommend to fill in gaps between larger shrubs?
Packer or?
I'll refer to Don on that. I'm more the design and build guy, and I do research specifically for plants. So off the top of my head, I can answer that. It sounds like it would be a good candidate for a rain garden area. You say it stays moist, but it doesn't stay saturated. But if you excavated that out and burned around the bottom of it, it probably would stay moist enough to have a rain garden area.
Right.
And then your husband would have to stay away from it with the mower.
I mean, it gets moist during like the heavy rains, but
Right.
then if we have a period where, like last October,
Right.
it was as parched as every other
Right.
section
Yeah.
of the earth. You said packera,
Packer loves those kind of conditions.
the native packera. Okay.
There's a
Yes,
couple species.
yeah, okay.
But it would be a good candidate for a rain garden area, it sounds like, if you kind of want to start from scratch and have a dedicated area, that you can put ground covers and different native perennials in there, and keep your elderberries there, and eliminate the lawn area in that area.
Excellent.
So for residential, like, if they are thinking in rain garden, what are the mistakes people make when they are designing rain gardens?
Well, a lot of people kind of skip the first part of evaluating the soils to know what they're dealing with. Some people have a good idea of generally what the soils are like, and they've lived in their yard long enough that they know what it does. But you want to have an idea of underneath, like at the depth that you want to have for this garden. Is it going to be able to hold enough water to support plants that require frequent saturation? So that is that would be a mistake in the planning phase of it. And then I guess the other common mistake would be not sizing it properly, not being able to calculate like how much water is actually going to be put into the rain garden, depending on how it would be fed. If it's just being fed from gravity flow from a slope, or if you're trying to run downspouts or some pump discharges into it. So basically the soil characteristics and the sizing are often kind of common mistakes that that you would make in you see like a DIY rain garden. And then maybe not choosing the right plants for it, but again, there's a lot of resources out there. I know you know your plants, but for most people here probably do. But there's a lot of good resources out there that if you know your soil types and how much saturation the area is going to get, they can suggest good native either seed mixes or plugs that you put in. But planting and sizing are probably the two trickier components of a homeowner wanting to put a rain garden in.
Thanks.
I have a question about the beginning of this process, when you described the testing for the soil. How deep down do you go when you are, doing an initial determination?
It really depends on, the anticipated design requirements. If we're going out with the intention of doing an infiltration bed, usually we're going at least 6-7 feet deep. For an infiltration bed, or even for a rain garden, by regulations, we need to evaluate the soil and determine that there's 2 feet of suitable soil from the bottom of the infiltration bed or the bottom of the rain garden to any type of limiting zone of the soil, which would be a seasonal higher perched water table or rock. So even if we're evaluating for a rain garden that's going to go at or just under the surface, we're going to excavate down to 5 or 6 feet so we can see what the soil horizon below looks like. Larger commercial systems where you're trying to get a large storage volume, sometimes we're down 14, 15 feet to see if we've got suitable soil, so we're not discharging directly into groundwater or putting a system in an area where it's going to be taking on more groundwater than water can eliminate. But to answer your question, average depth, between 5 and 8 feet. so we can get a good idea of what's going on below the bottom of the rain garden or infiltration bed.
That's like excavating.
Yeah. it's
Like that's not like with a shovel. You
No, it's not,
excavate
it's not, so,
Right, yeah, this is not a
We
DI.
could bury something under there.
And that's for a residential rain garden?
for a resident, yeah, I mean, most rain gardens are at a depth of about 2 to 3 feet below the surface. Again, in some areas like in Montgomery County, if you go 2 feet down, you're into groundwater, so we're building rain gardens pretty much on the ground surface, or even above by bringing in an extra mix of like rain garden blend. Of course, it's got to be downhill enough from where you're trying to capture the water, and then we've got to build a berm on the downslope sides for actually containing it, because we're building it on the surface.
Are solar panels, ground mount solar panels, are they considered an impervious surface?
That's an interesting question, and it's not something I've come across where people are required to put in stormwater because of solar panels.
Okay.
But I've wondered that, and I'm wondering how long it's going to take for the regulations to catch up before they start considering that impervious. I mean, usually you've got some kind of like, ground area underneath, but it's also, kind of directing it away from that ground area. So
Is there any kind of planting that you would recommend under solar panels or around?
I guess any kind of native grasses that because you're not going to want to mow them.
Right.
And so something that's going to be able to prevent erosion, because, it'll come off the panels, but then you'll have a concentrated flow downhill of that. So like native grasses that you want to let grow tall that are going to help prevent erosion.
Do you work with other maintenance firms? I mean, because unless someone's a really experienced gardener, that's going to be really hard to maintain. Are there people who do that?
I work with firms, but they're more geared towards, larger systems and being able to maintain inlet and outlet structures. So no, I don't work directly with, people that want rain gardens but don't want to do the maintenance and gardening themselves.
Okay, so most people who get a rain garden, they want their gardeners.
Most people that get a rain garden because they've chosen that over an infiltration bed, or in instances where the soils just won't handle an infiltration bed and people are, not so enthusiastic about having a rain garden, in that case we usually are just putting like a planting mix like that seed there. So it's a lot less maintenance than maintaining plants and shrubs and small trees. So either people are really enthusiastic about having them and want to do the work themselves, or have gardeners or landscapers that can handle it, or they want something that's low maintenance, that's basically just a planting mix, native grasses, some wildflowers that require a lot less maintenance.
And then they mow once a year or something, or?
They should. I don't know if they all do, but they should mow or weed whack it and clear it out, so so they can get good growth the following year. I looked at one recently that was planted with a lot of plugs and looked nice, and they hadn't done much to it, if anything. And it's at least all vegetated, so it's doing its job. But they didn't want to put in the work of maintaining a lot of perennials and small shrubs and things like that. But at least whatever took over was something that was planted there originally, and is at least doing the job of keeping it from eroding when it gets in.
Right. I was just thinking when we were asking about the depth of that stormwater system, or stormwater testing, when I've gone with you to do it, I've been surprised by how narrow it is. So it's not when, like you said, like it's sort of like excavating because it's so deep, but they're very narrow sections that you're testing.
Right, yeah. We're usually like in a trench that's like about this wide, and we get used to it after a while, and there's no need in doing any more digging on someone's property before any construction starts. So like we try to keep a pretty small profile on where we're testing, but and no matter how much I explain to customers or clients like what we need to do, you know, half of them come out and they're like, oh my God, you brought an excavator, you're digging up my entire yard. And I just like, well, just think of it as progress for your pool that's eventually going in that you
Yeah.
need stormwater management for. So, you know, we try not to disrupt too much, so we just look at a couple narrow profiles throughout the area where the systems can go.
So, Paul, you learned how to do this from, and is this your engineering brought you to?
I learned a little bit of it in college, and I learned probably most of it just on the job. The first company that I worked with, we did all this type of work, so I absorbed as much as I could.
Like a regular.
20 years of experience, just
Right.
learned things along the way.
So I know you engineer everything, but do you ever test it? Do you ever like figure out the flow and how much is being retained and then?
In terms of after the fact?
Yes.
No, that's more for the maintenance companies. And most townships now require some type of operation and maintenance agreement for stormwater systems, that homeowners have to hire someone and submit those reports. We don't do that kind of maintenance and monitoring, but that is required. And, you know, hopefully if things were designed and installed well, everything's working great and it just needs minimal maintenance. But there are companies out there that do that, so you can submit your annual or biannual reports depending on the township's requirement.
So, I used to live over in Montgomery County, and they develop all over the place. And when they did the developments, they just carve out this huge basin, and it's grass, and it's always dry, and then there's a gutter out of it, and it pours somewhere else when it rains. And
Right.
it doesn't seem to hold it or do anything. Is that changing these days? Like, or can
No, I mean, you still-
developments still do that? I mean, like, they put up 10 houses, and there's this big basin that's doesn't really look like it does what it should.
It's been a pretty progressive industry, and, you know, in the last 10 years, most townships have, like, adopted the ordinances based on the state regulations. So things done prior to then were not as well regulated, not as well designed. You still do see retention or detention basins like that,
Yeah,
which is basically like an oversized rain garden, but without, you know,
Pretty
the
plants.
aesthetics of the plants. You know, they're just designed to capture water, and, you know, you don't want them to stay full. They should be, you know, so they'll always have that outlet structure somewhere on the side or in the middle of it, so when it gets filled to a, you know, predetermined volume, it'll run off and go somewhere else, and it should, you know, if it's designed properly, empty out within, you know, 24, 48 hours. But, I mean, you do see a lot of not very well functioning stormwater systems from developments that happened in the 90s before there were stormwater regulations that were pretty standard.
I'm
across
talking
the
like
board.
just 5-10 years ago.
Okay.
Like dug out, and then I used to live along the Perkiomen, and they built a development there, and then it just, the drainage just cut through the hillside, so this little ditch that was like maybe this, was
Right.
then like 3 feet, just because of
Yeah.
that storm basin
And it
thing.
sounds like a design properly, designed for the amount of outflow that it would have. And what township is it, do you remember?
Lower Providence.
It should by now be on a maintenance program where it needs to be inspected. But if it's not properly designed with the right amount of outfall structures and the right volume for those structures, you will get exactly what you're talking about, which is what you're trying to prevent in the first place is erosion. So hopefully at some point the township makes them follow their maintenance program.
I doubt it.
All right, any other questions? You got one more question?
Yes, do you use swell for water management?
Swales?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I thought I had one in there, but it's one of the techniques that we use to divert water into a rain garden. You know, a lot of times they'll see swells, even if they're kind of mild and gradual around a house to prevent water from coming down towards the house. And then, you know, direct that towards either an infiltration bed or a rain garden. So we use them a lot.
Do you use it alone? Let's say choose the swell.
Sometimes, yeah. There are some rain gardens where they're just fed by either upslope gravity flow or a collection swell. You know, swells can be a little tricky if you have a small area to work in because they got, you know, kind of like an outflow pipe, they've got to be designed so they've got enough capacity. And so sometimes they end up being pretty wide where you might have space restrictions. You certainly don't want, like, right outside your back door, like a pronounced swell that's, you know, going to be a tripping hazard or something that, like, you can't mow over. But the one rain garden I was showing there with the planting that we were doing, that was fed by a couple downspouts and also like a mild swell that came around the driveway towards it. You know, and it's a pretty low cost way to, you know, to get water to go where you want it to go if you've got the room, and you know, aesthetically it's not going to disrupt the landscape.
Have you designed any rain gardens around here, like in West Vincent or Phoenixville area?
I have not in West Vincent or Phoenixville. We've done some infiltration beds around here, but trying to think the closest that we've done one in St. Peter's. Yeah, just hasn't come up here yet. A lot in Malvern area, Radnor. You know, it kind of correlates a lot to where a lot of the development's going on too, right? Because, you know, not many people are doing this voluntarily. There's not many people that are enthusiasts that want to deal with an issue and put in the time and the expense that's going to take, and have the interest in creating some kind of you know, native, beautiful structure in their yard that's going to be functional. So, I mean, I would say 90–95% of the stormwater work that we do, whether it's infiltration beds or rain gardens, are with some type of development, whether it's a new house or, you know, a lot of pool installations. Brings a lot of stormwater work. So, you know, we always love when someone calls us up and they've got an actual problem that they want to solve. Or if they're doing this really expensive stormwater system that they have to do because they're building an addition in the pool, we can incorporate into solving some kind of existing drainage problem that they have. But you know, a lot of the work is just based on permitting requirements for new construction or development of some sort.